To create the kind of performance I need in others to get the outcomes I want, I have to figure out what kind of performance I need. So that's standards, and the job inventory will take us there. I determine, do they have the capacity to do it? But another thing I want to do is create the kind of environment where they want to do it. Again, if all I do is manage and I not lead, the best I'm going to get is their compliance. I manage and lead, I get commitment, that discretionary effort. So I put this slide back in. Remember why we're here, this leadership chain. We want a healthy, high-performing organization. Working our way back, the way that we do that is by creating a great work environment. The way that we do that is through the types of behaviors that we demonstrate through our commitment to our values, and of course the skills we demonstrate day in and day out. So let's begin this over on page 41, and this should be quite an animated conversation about levels of employee engagement. So take a look at page 41. The Gallup organization, which is a global polling organization, every couple of years conducts a survey of what they call employee engagement. And at the top of page 41, there's actually a definition of employee engagement. Would you take a minute and read that definition? What engagement is, it's a measurable degree of an employee's positive or negative emotional attachment that profoundly affects how they think and act and interact and perform at work. There's 3 categories that this global survey calls out. In fact, they also do regional surveys, and what we have here on page 41 is the result of the latest global survey. And what this shows is at a global level, only 13% of anyone who's taken home a paycheck fits into this category, what we call engaged. Take a minute, read that definition of engaged employee here. It's in the yellow column. It really is. The good news in the States, it's a lot better. It's around 30%. But still 3 out of 10. But in this one, from a global level, only 1 out of 10 are in this category. 63%, or 6 out of 10, are not engaged. These employees, as the definition says, are essentially checked out. They're sleepwalking through the day. They're putting in the time, but they're not putting in energy or passion. Now the question sometimes comes up, well, I'd be happy to even have that kind of employee. They're getting the work done, right? Yeah. Maybe not, but if they're just putting in the time, they probably require a lot more supervision, which takes away that margin that we've been aiming for. I remember the first time I was at Sydney, Ohio, and we were walking through this. How many of you have been to Sydney? Okay. And I think I was in the former chicken slaughterhouse facility. Okay, yeah. And we looked at this and they started chuckling. They said, oh, we have a group, we have a name for this group in the middle. We call them the Punch, Lunch, and Punch group. And I said, sorry, I'm new here. What do you mean? They go, well, they punch in, they have lunch, and they punch out. I mean, they're there, they're getting the work done, but without passion at all. Look at this last figure. This is really startling too. Almost 25% of the global workforce is actively disengaged. Read the definition here. They're not just unhappy, they are busy acting it out. And if you actually read the Gallup research, they actually they dream about how they're going to disrupt things at work. They actually dream about it at home thinking, whose life am I going to make miserable today? So they're not just not engaged, they're actively disengaged. They're acting it out at work, and that requires a lot of supervision on our part too. You're right. You're exactly right. I'm glad you called that out. I would say, like, the people who are engaged, they're on track. The people who are not engaged, they're kind of on a treadmill. The people who are actively disengaged, they got off the treadmill and they're busy trying to yank everybody else off their treadmills as well. Now, here's what I find interesting. I've been in the workforce 29 years, and I have yet to meet a person who walked through the door on day one saying, I'm here to be actively disengaged. Something's happened. Now, sometimes the question comes up, somebody will raise their hand and say, okay, this is global, how is it at Emerson? We don't measure employee engagement. We measure the employee relations climate and how they feel about where they work, but it's not an engagement survey. And by the way, this has nothing to do with employee satisfaction. I could be actively disengaged, but I could actually be quite satisfied with where I'm working. I like my pay, I like my benefits, I like the cafeteria, I like my commute. So I could be very satisfied about my working conditions, but busy acting out my unhappiness. So I think the more important question is, what causes employees to become or remain engaged? I mean, I think that's where we're spending our time in. What causes employees to become or remain not engaged? And then what causes employees to become or remain actively disengaged? Something happens or something doesn't happen that affects our level of engagement. So I think the best way of doing this is I want you to be an individual contributor for this exercise. I want you to individually contribute your expertise to each one of these 3 questions. So John, if I could ask you a favor, pull out that flip chart behind you, and Bethany, the same thing. And I have 3 questions on 3 flip charts. What I need you to do is, as an individual contributor, is I want you all to grab a pen and write down the answers to these questions. Flip it back 1 page. Yeah, flip it back 1 page. So start at any flip chart you want to. There's no particular order. You don't have to work as a group. You can just do this individually and bring into your own experience. Maybe think about what's caused you to become or remain engaged in the past, or maybe there were some times you were actually not engaged or actively disengaged. What happened or didn't happen that caused that? Bring in your own collective experience. Go from flip chart to flip chart, and in about 10 minutes we'll actually debrief it, okay? Do you have any questions about what I'm asking you to do? Okay, go to any flip chart that you want, just as long as you contribute to each one. Exactly. And when you think about people's level of engagement, sometimes it's a slow, gradual erosion, and other times it's like really quick. So it's it could be like a slow, a noticeable leak in a tire, or sometimes something happens and bam, it's like a blowout. But they both happen. There's actually a very simple but powerful motivational model that will apply to both motivate and influence people. It's simply called Know Them, Involve Them, and Grow Them. And here's how we're going to explore this on page 42. What I'd like you to do is, in your groups, I'd like you to list 15 things that you could do. 5 things that you could do as managers and leaders, whether you're a supervisor or individual contributor, to know employees. 5 things that you could do to involve them. 5 things that you could do to grow them. Start with an action verb followed by a noun, and let's see what we can come up with over the next 10 minutes, okay? So you should come up with a total of 15 items using an action verb and a noun. Work together with the people at your table. Here's how we're going to debrief this. At your table, there's a playing card. Go ahead and grab a playing card. Can you take one and pass it around? Find your matches according to your suit of cards. So there should be like an ace, a king, a queen, and a jack. So one from each table. So you'll be able to find 3 other people who are at tables other than yours, and you're going to compare notes and share what you came up with, and they're going to share what they came up with, and you're going to add to the list. Now, because we have an odd number of people, we have a joker card around, so you can go to any group that you want. Jokers are wild, you can join any group. So go to your suit, not your face. So line up with your suit. So all the clubs should go in one group, all the spades in another, all the hearts, all the diamonds. Jokers are wild, so you can go wherever you want. It may not take a great deal of skill to do these things, but what might it take to be able to do it? Time? Effort. Yeah, it's more, at this point, I think you'd agree with me, it's more will than skill. So the idea here is if we do it, I think there's some things that we'll get from it, and if we don't do it, there's some things that we're going to get or not get too, right? So let's put this into perspective on page 42. You've come up with a list of activities that you as a manager and leader at Emerson can do using an action, verb, and a noun. What did we call that list earlier today? That list of things that we do with an action, verb, and a noun? Job inventory. So if you're not sure what expected performance looks like for you, I think you've just written it down. This is maybe your standard. And if we do these things, we're going to create a motivational environment. And if we don't, we'll probably see some of those things that we have in the back of the room. Now, what gets in the way of this? Sometimes it's will, sometimes it's skill, sometimes it's want, sometimes it's unconscious bias. So I'd actually like to go back to that here. Just, you don't have to flip back in your book, but how we talked about unconscious bias influences how we manage and lead others. So we said, well, how do we overcome it? How do we bring that which was unconscious up to light so that we can become aware and deal with it? So there were 3 keys. Turn a hidden bias into a visible one, retrain your brain, and build relationships with people who are different than yourself. So here's what I want you to discuss is, what on page 42 that you've written down with your peers can address 1, 2, or all 3 of these areas? If you look at some of these things and saying, if I did this, so this would turn my hidden bias into a visible one, or if I did this, this would help retrain my brain, or if I did this one, this would allow me to build relationships with somebody who's different than me. Could you take a minute and try to connect the dots here? If you did these actions on page 42, do you think you'd be able to attend to some of these?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So again, I wanted to constantly bring back connections. All right. If I'm not sure how many you ended up with on page 42. You probably had at least 15. You might have gone up to 20 or 25. However, if those 15 items on page 42 weren't enough, on page 43, there's 25 more things. So what I'd like to do is introduce to you the first of several assessments you're going to be taking for the rest of the workshop. You know, I think it was Socrates who said, the non-examined life is not worth living. And I'd say that the non-examined manager isn't worth working for. So I'd like you to do a quick self-examination right now on page 43. And here's the key word on the directions. Determine by saying yes or no whether you consistently apply these behaviors. So the key word is consistently. What I'd like you to do is just go through this checklist. This is for you only. But let's see how well you're doing right now in creating a motivational environment. When you think about it, this could be a very powerful tool. So let me ask you a question. Just humor me here. Let's imagine after the workshop and in your next staff meeting with your team of direct reports, you say, you know what, one of the things I want to do as your manager is create a more motivational environment. Could you please fill this out and tell me how you see me doing in this area? So what would be the risks you'd face if you did that? You say, fill it out anonymously, but I want your feedback. How do you see me? Do you see me doing this consistently? What are the risks you'd face? So, you know, part of my job is to tell you, report on how our peers around the world have applied these skills as part of the Capstone Conference. And there's more than several who actually did that after the workshop. One of the first things they did in their first staff meeting is saying, you know what, I want to create a more motivational environment, but I need kind of a benchmark. How do you see me doing here? And I remember the first time somebody did it, I was like really impressed. I said, well, what were the risks you faced when you did that? I said, well, the risk was they tell me the truth. What was the reward? Well, they tell me the truth. I mean, it's really kind of interesting. Now, one person said, well, if I gave this to my team and asked them to do this, they would just think I just took a bath in the Kool-Aid from corporate. I mean, wow, they really brainwash you there. But imagine it. I mean, what might your employees think of you if you actually tried something like this? Because there's an element of risk, there's an element of reward. What might be going through your employees' mind if you actually did something like that? You drink the Kool-Aid. Yeah. They might think you care. And if they think you care, what's going to happen in your relationships and your results? Probably go up. So I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I can tell you what your peers have done, our peers around the world. And there's an element of risk, there's an element of reward. How can this page help you in the future? I mean, it's one thing to look at it today, but how could this page help you a week from now, or 3 months from now, or a year from now? It'd be interesting. You know, we talked about your direct reports filling this out. How about if you gave this to your peers, or to your boss or bosses? You know, this might, again, you could look at this one of two ways. This is highlighting opportunities or highlighting problems. I'd like to look at it as this is highlighting opportunities for us to improve. I mean, when you boil it down, when I ask, what must I do to create the kind of performance I need in others? Here are 25 things I can do. Einstein said, never memorize anything you could look up. That's why he was so smart. In much the same way, you don't have to memorize anything from this workshop. You just know how to access these tools. Here's what I'd like you to do. This is an individual exercise. Again, building and deepening a relationship. This builds on very naturally about know them, involve them, and grow them. This is an individual exercise. The instructions are up on the screen and also on the bottom of page 44. As I'm looking at your priority objectives, one of the things that got the most ticks from the group was objective number 3. It says, influence others without using formal authority. Now, this is important whether you have direct reports or not. Who do you need to influence without formal authority? Think about where you work. Who do you need to influence without using formal authority?
Is that a question?
Yeah. It's a question. Who do you need to influence? Your customers. Your vendors. Your peers.
Leadership.
Your leaders. What's that? Your stakeholders. You left an important group out.
My wife.
That's true.
She has authority.
What about your direct reports? Why do you want to influence them without using formal authority?
Because that's leading and not managing.
Right. And if you influence them without formal authority, what are we going to get from them?
Commitment.
We're going to get their commitment, right?
Oh, I thought you said what if we don't?
Yeah, so we're going to get their commitment. That's what we want. So this is an important skill. Let's get back to that definition of influence. Top of page 42. Let's just flip back there real quick. It'll set the context for what we'll be doing between now and the time we wrap up today. Influence is the process of gaining the commitment of another person to a course of action that you both believe is of the best interest. So in order to do that, we need to influence them. And this is a really critical skill. Now, this takes us in more to the leadership side of things. And on page 45, let's talk about how influence works. This is very subtle but incredibly powerful. Page 45. How does influence work? First, what do we mean by this statement? Influence is in the eye of the beholder. What does that mean? But I would suggest that this has been true today. Influence is in the eye of the beholder. It says here, influence is granted to us by others. In other words, people determine how much influence they're going to allow us to have over them. And so we need to earn it every day in a number of ways, in a way that's not manipulative, in a way it's earned. I would suggest that during the course of our time together, from what little you've known of me, I might have been able to earn influence in your eyes. You didn't know me from Adam this morning, but through the course of the day, perhaps through different means, you've granted me some ability to have influence over you. Not control, but just influence. And here's how. On page 45, 4 sources of influence. There's position influence. And people do what we ask them or need them to do because we have the title. That's what, Mike, you were really kind of referring to as positional authority. I'm going to use the word influence here. Now, it's not necessarily bad. We can actually get it to work in our favor, and we'll see how. In a way that's not manipulative or just simply pulling rank. It's more than that. It's much more powerful than that. Expertise authority influence. People do what we ask them to do is because when they look at you, they see you as having the functional knowledge and skills and capabilities and background to make the right call. So you earn the ability to influence them and to gain their commitment to an idea. Personality influence, people do what we want them to do because they see us as being likable. We've got good people skills. We've got charisma. We've got good listening skills. So they grant us the ability to have influence over them. And then finally, values authority. We have the opportunity to influence people because when they look at you, they know that you walk the talk. You operate from a set of core values and you manage and lead in integrity. So these are 4 different sources of influence that we can earn. But the fact is we can also erode them as well. Have you ever seen a time when somebody's maybe eroded their opportunity to influence somebody? It could be a leader, somebody in office. Yeah, and the list goes on from there. Let's take a look at page 46. We saved perhaps the toughest thinking activity for late in day 1, but this is an important thinking activity. For some of you, this is going to be the big aha moment of our 3 days invested. Developing and eroding your influence. Again, eroding might be slow and gradual, like gradual beach erosion, or it might be catastrophic, like a tsunami. And sometimes you erode your opportunity to influence very gradually, almost unnoticed. Other times it's bang, boom, and your history. So what I'd like you to do is in your groups is I'd like you to think through what are some things we can do as managers and leaders at Emerson to develop our potential to influence people in these 3 areas. And what might be some things that we do or don't do that erode our ability to influence in these areas. I want to give you 1 or 2 to get started, like position influence. One thing that I can do to develop my ability is make timely decisions. Have you ever worked for that person that would study a good idea until it became a bad idea? And then they really eroded their position because they were so indecisive. Or an action I might do that would erode my position influence is like, Mike, I think you said it before, pulling rank. I'm on top, you're on tap. So what I'd like you to do is in your groups, carefully think, what are some actions you can take to develop your potential to influence people? And what are some things you do or don't do that might be eroding your ability to gain their commitment in those areas? I'm going to give you about 15 minutes to work through this exercise. Let's take a couple of these. What did you have for ways to develop position influence? What did you have there? Follow through. Excellent. Good. If you haven't written these down, that one down added to it. Let's get one more from this group. What can you do to develop position influence? Sharing the successes. Great. What else? Yeah, good. Ask questions. Yeah. One of my favorite quotes is written by the guy who won the Nobel Prize in Literature. He was an Egyptian. He said, you could tell if a person is smart by their answers. You could tell if they're wise by their questions. You know, and leverage wisdom by asking great questions. What else can we do to develop expertise influence?
Be patient.
Be patient.
Adaptability.
Be adaptable. Yeah, there's more than one way of doing things. Stay current on your skills. Join industry trade groups. What might be eroding our expertise influence?
And what point of truth?
Yeah, I think I heard this group kind of call them the knowledge hoarders or something like that. Yeah, so yeah, kind of the same thing. What else might erode our expertise influence?
Know-it-alls.
Being the know-it-alls. Yeah.
Making your opinion fact.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, changing an opinion into a fact.
Being honest when you don't.
Yeah, so you know, admit when you don't know.
A negative track record.
A negative track record, yeah. Absolutely, a track record of bad decisions, having to be the smartest person in the room. How about personality influence? What can we do to develop that?
Active listening.
Listen well, good. What else?
Being a team player.
Yes, good. What else?
Disagreeing in a healthy way.
Hmm.
Healthy disagreement.
Good, healthy disagreement.
Two-way communication.
Open two-way communication.
Being respectful.
Showing respect. What erodes personality influence?
Manipulation.
Oh yeah, good. Manipulating.
Lying.
Lying.
Not actually getting any work done.
Yeah.
Too much relationship building.
Yeah, maybe spending too much time on relationships that you're not delivering results.
Or temperament.
Yeah, bad temperament. How about values? What can we do to gain people's commitment through values influence?
Act ethically.
Yes, act ethically, act consistently and fair.
With integrity.
Yeah, lead with integrity.
Be transparent.
Yeah, transparent.
Manage your biases.
Manage your biases. Yeah, good. Identify them and then deal with them.
Be someone your people can count on.
Yeah, be dependable. Let your word be your word, right? Your yes be yes.
Admit when you're wrong.
Yeah, admit when you're wrong. What erodes this?
Lying.
Lying.
Acting unethically.
Yes, good.
Taking credit for someone else's idea.
The credit hugs. Yeah. Yes.
Acting in contrast with your stated values.
Yeah. So again, not walking the talk. Is that what you're saying? So how many of you have driven home at the end of the day thinking, I just eroded my influence with this one person in this one area? So some of you have, but you know, what I want you to do is I want you to all think about, you know, what am I doing to earn the ability to influence other people to gain their commitment? Or what am I doing or not doing that's actually keeping me from influencing them to gain their commitment? This is a really thoughtful activity, and it's worth thinking about. So I want you to do that on page 47. Here's the last big activity we do before our test. You remember I promised you that? The good news is you're getting out early today. But we've got some important work on page 47. This is a new addition to the workshop. This is something that we felt like really needed to move it from being aware to actually doing something about it. So this is an individual exercise on page 47. I'd like you to think about 2 or 3 people who you need to influence without using formal authority. I'd like you to list them in the left column. I'd like you to identify which source or sources of influence you think you need to leverage, and then what you're going to do to earn that influence in their eyes and what you're going to do to make sure you don't erode it. I'd like you to take about 10 minutes to do that, please. You think about maybe your next staff meeting or maybe a next project meeting or a next meeting with your boss and your peers. This might actually be a good preparation tool for you to get you ready to think about what you need to do and how you need to do it and whose commitment you need to gain to your ideas. Was this a helpful activity? Good, good. Thanks for being willing to try it out. At this point, you kind of know the routine, you know what's going to happen at this point. You need to go to your implementation plan on page 130. 130. So what are you going to start doing or stop doing? Let's do a quick replay here. We looked at factors of engagement, talked about what causes employees to become or remain engaged, become or remain not engaged, become or remain actively disengaged. We looked at a very powerful motivational model on page 41 called Know Them, Involve Them, and Grow Them. And there's your job inventory. That's your motivation inventory. You came up with 15 to 25 different ideas. If that weren't enough, on the next page, 42, I think you came up with maybe 25 more things. And then we talked about building and deepening relationships. And then we looked at 4 sources of authority influence that we have and what we could do to earn it and what we might be doing that erodes it. So what did you learn? What are you going to do? What are you going to not do? All right, so a couple things before we get to our test. You remember this workshop was built around 4 business outcomes. We said leading at Emerson would be a success when we got these 4 things on the wall. So what I'd like you to do is just turn to a neighbor at your table and say, if I applied the knowledge and skill and used the tools and processes I gained today, how many of these business outcomes do you think I'd begin to put a hit on? Try to be as specific as you can as you look through, starting back from pages 1 through the last page, I think 47. If I did these and I used the tools and used the process, how many of these outcomes might I reach? Just turn to a neighbor and discuss that for a minute, would you? You'll notice at the end of your table, sitting in front of you all day long, were these laminated alphabet cards. So what I need you to do is divide your table group up into 2 teams. And here's going to be our test. We're going to have a group multiple choice test or a true-false test. So using these A, B, C, or D cards, I'm going to pose a series of questions to you. There'll be traditional 4-part multiple choice questions, or I might toss in a couple binary choice like true-false questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reveal the question on the screen. You need to turn to your neighbor and come up to a consensus as to what you think is the right answer, and then you hold up the card. Don't shout out the answer. I carry these all the way from my office 10 yards away, so I want my money's worth. So you need to come to an agreement. Now what I like about this is if you're not sure what the right answer is, you try it out on your neighbor before you try it out on me. All right. The person primarily responsible for these 7 factors of performance is?
All of you.
I'm an easy grader.
It's all the same.
Just hold up any card. Yeah, false. All right, good. That said, thank you. I hope you had a good day. You can take the rest of the day off with pay. There's no homework, so we'll see you tomorrow. You can leave your materials here.